The Empress returns by Iowa forever. Chapter 3.01 Stranded. In the empty void of space, reality contorted as a sparking hulk came spiraling out of the warp. It kept its forward momentum only briefly, its undamaged engines flickering and dying with a final cough of light. Soon the rest of the ship went with it, exterior lights and undamaged viewports winking out one by one until only a quiet wreck hung in space. Their reserves were spent. The Sanguinium martyrs would go no further. Damage report, Matthias said, his voice weary. It had been only hours after their escape from Solemnus, and only now was he coming off the adrenaline rush of combat. Slumped over in a chair on the command deck, he waited for the captain's report to come through. Resigned to whatever fate awaited him, he paid no mind to any others as they went about their duties. Most were busy cleaning up what had once been their astropaths. Such a loss would have made him furious at any other time, but now. 3 engines destroyed, the rest are unresponsive, the captain started. Void shields. Offline. Weapons batteries are reporting 20% integrity, all others unresponsive. Hull integrity currently stands at 40%, stable. Life support systems is 60%, though they will most likely stabilize closer to 40%. Communications. Offline. The traitors knew to cripple us thoroughly. Casualties. Reading 55%, with a margin of error of 2%, Matthias said nothing, reaching up with his left hand and massaging his face as he mulled over the report. Even if we got the ship up and running again, we don't have the strength to man it effectively. After a pause, he spoke again. How long until we are reported missing? Our planned transit time to Solemnus was 2 years, 1 month, and 12 days, the captain replied. With the warp storm that brought us there, our current damage, and with our navigator and astropaths dead, I cannot say for certain when we will be missed, if we are not already. Perhaps if Lady Terra is able to, she can reach out to the Empress and alert her to our plight. Matthias paused. Given the events on Solemnus, he was uncertain if Twilight would be up for anything for a few days, but if it gave her a chance to speak to the Empress. My lord? Matthias blinked as the captain drew him back to reality. Apologies, just mulling our course of action, Matthias said, standing up before continuing. Our first priority is getting communications back online. If we can get a distress signal up, then perhaps we will not have to suffer out here alone for much longer. Speak with Magos Errol and start organizing repair teams and have all power rerouted from our guns and shields. For now. Yes, my lord. Any further orders? I'll leave that to your discretion. Alert me if we are spotted by anything. And with that, Matthias closed the communication, standing in silence for a minute longer as he mulled further. A part of him wanted to leave, to return to his room and wait for the situation to stabilize somewhat. But on a crippled ship stranded in Empress knew where in the galaxy, stability was beyond fleeting. Step up and be the leader, Matthias, he thought. That's why you're still alive, isn't it? Matthias turned and exited the room, tucking his hands behind his back as he walked down the hall. The passage was darker than normal, no doubt due to the hammering the ship had taken, but he knew the path well enough to not get lost. The only obstacles would be whatever had been knocked loose from the fighting, statues and machinery lying in broken heaps waiting for servitors or crewmen to come and clear them away. Matthias continued in silence for several minutes before a light in one of the rooms ahead caught his attention, a sole pinpoint among the dark that drew him like an insect to flame. He paused as he realized he'd reached the upper mess halls, empty save for a lone sister of battle seated at one of the central tables. From afar, Matthias could easily make out Naomi, the sister superior, looking down into a steaming mug of tea, oblivious to all around her. Deciding that walking alone would do him no good, Matthias stepped into the hall and approached Naomi. Lord Matthias, Naomi said, still not looking up from her tea. I would have thought you would be directing the repairs. I've done all I can, Matthias said. I'm not the Empress, so I cannot rebuild this ship on my own. Errol will have a full diagnosis soon and will take point on repairs. He took a seat across from Naomi before continuing. I suppose you had similar thoughts as I? My business is killing the foes of the Imperium. What do I know of repairing derelicts? Naomi took a sip from her tea, turning her eyes to meet Matthias. I would be in my quarters, but Terra has always encouraged me to be more open. You're still alone here. Small steps, my lord. Matthias let out a short chuckle at this. The two sat in silence before Naomi spoke again. Terra is not doing well. I gathered, Matthias sighed, resting his chin on his knuckles. I'd go down to see her myself, but I seem to have a knack for sticking my foot in it when it comes to her emotions. She may bear armor and blade, but she is still a civilian at heart. Naomi took another drink from her tea. I never got a chance to feel what that was like, to know innocence and peace and see the good in all people. Perhaps that's why I am here, lest I be the one to stick my foot in it as it were. She's connected well with you and your sisters, though, Matthias pointed out. You, at least, didn't contemplate killing her out of paranoia. Perhaps, but I know where my strengths lie. I am a soldier, an instructor. I tell a sister to come, she comes, and I tell her to go, she goes. I can clear a trench or duel a champion well enough, but to console one such as Tara in her grief? Naomi shrugged, brushing her hand against her branded cheek. My scars are much older. For Tara, I leave her recovery to the younger sisters. They have experienced similar loss more recently than I have. You speak of Moria, then? Naomi stopped, raising an eyebrow as Matthias continued. It came up during my research on our way to Romana Prime. Since I was not there, it was mostly an academic point. For the sake of everyone, I would keep it at that. Naomi looked back at her tea. My girls will bring Tara back from the brink. Even Judith could do wonders for her right now. She just needs to take the step to heal first. Sooner would be better. Matthias straightened up. I don't want to rush this. Tara doesn't need that kind of stress, but our communications were destroyed during the battle and all our psychers save Tara and Angelique went with them. Tara needs to contact the Empress for our rescue, or we'll be stuck out here for months at best before anything happens to find us. We will do what we can, Naomi said, taking yet another sip of tea. But this will only progress at its own pace. It took me 46 years to even begin to make peace with my scarring at the hands of the Eldar. For Tara, only the Empress knows how long until she heals, if she ever truly does. For her sake, I hope it is soon, Matthias said, looking down at the table. For all our sakes. Mirchen was dead. Twilight sat on her bed, staring at the far wall of her room. Her armor lay in a cluttered mess on the floor, the joint still sparking with residual magic from when she had removed it. Her sword too lay among the rest, pushed off to the side so she would not slice off a hand or a foot when she put everything back together. Mirchen was dead. She stared ahead, her hands tucked in her lap as she tugged on a seam in her jumpsuit. For its proximity to the outer hull, it was a miracle her room was not damaged during the battle, a fact that Twilight would have been grateful for in any other circumstance. Mirchen was dead. Twilight wanted to cry. She really did. It would be so easy, just to collapse and weep, pour everything out and wait for Spike or Fluttershy or Celestia to come and tell her everything would be fine. But Spike and her friends were a universe away, Celestia who knew where. The Imperium had no time for tears. So she would have none. A knock at her door jolted her from her thoughts. She smoothed out an imaginary wrinkle in her suit before rising. Who is it? It's me, Tara, the muffled voice of Rebecca called. Veronica and I brought you some food. Would you like us to come in? Twilight opened her mouth, but stopped herself. The old Twilight, the weak Twilight, the Twilight who let Mirchen die, that Twilight would have said yes, embraced the sisters and poured her soul to them. The Imperium has no place for that. No, just leave it there, she said finally. I'll come get it in a moment. But Tara, are you sure? Veronica asked. No one should remain alone in their grief. I'm fine, Twilight countered, forcing a shrug as she stood and moved towards her armor, picking up a few segments before speaking. I'll be out in a few minutes. Just leave the food and I'll get to it, don't you worry. There was a mumbled reply, but soon Twilight heard a small clank and the sound of the sisters walking away. Once she was certain they were gone, she let out a sigh and continued to gather her armor. I'll be fine, she muttered. I've pulled through before, and I can pull through again. Then I can make sure no one dies again. Make sure no one dies. She stopped, glancing at the pauldron that bore her cutie mark. She gave another sigh before pushing the armor away with her foot. Most powerful mortal magic user, and I can't even save one person. What does that have to say about me? She paced, returning to her bed once more as she clenched and unclenched her hands. Here she was, cooped up inside with so much more to do. Why was she still worrying about things? They got the unbound flame, they escaped the Chaos Fleet, why worry? Mirchen was dead. Twilight would have gone back to sitting, but a growl from her stomach brought her back to reality. I should eat, she thought. Grief waits. They'll need me strong if we're going to get back to the Imperium. She turned and stepped towards the door, opening it fully as she peered out into the darkened hall. It took her only a few seconds to realize she was not alone. The mare clutches to the darkness, Angelique whispered. The psyker was sitting opposite to Twilight's door, her knees pulled up in her chest as she fiddled with the hem of her skirt. She strikes it to save the spark, but the drake stands alone against the serpent. I wonder how much you really know about me, Twilight said, looking down at the platter the sisters had left her. It was nothing much, a few small rolls and some protein paste, but it was better than nothing. Ever since I met you you've always spoke in riddles, and you always seem to talk about me as the mayor. The eye falls and the sons of the dragon rise, Angelique said, staring into space as if Twilight were not there. The mayor. Does she see what she needs? Does she know what the answer is? If I did, would you still be here? Twilight asked, her voice sharp as she took up the tray. You should get some rest. Go find Bianca, maybe, she at least can take care of her charges. The pillar breaks, but not yet, Angelique said, finally looking up at Twilight. Her eyes were dark, sorrowful, and Twilight could see lines of tears on her cheeks. Do you know the answer? Does your answer please them? What would you know about anything like that? Twilight snapped, almost dropping the food as she glared at Angelique. All you ever do is talk nonsense. Can't you focus and break through the madness on your own? Why do I have to help everyone that comes to me with a problem, and why am I so bad at it? Why does your stupid Imperium have to be so insane all the damn time? Angelique said nothing, pulling her knees in tighter as she looked away from Twilight. The flower shines a light in the darkness, and the mayor will know the answer, she said, wrapping her arms around her knees. Well, I don't know the answer. I don't seem to know the answers for anything around here, because you all keep changing the questions on me. And you know what? Fine. I don't care about having any answers, and I won't give any if all of you are just not going to care anyway. What do you have to say to that? A pause, Angelique merely staring ahead as Twilight snorted. That's what I thought. Now please, just leave me alone. And with that she stepped back in her room, slamming the door shut on Angelique as the psyker continued to stare into the dark. Twilight stood at the door, her hands quivering as she did her best to calm herself back down. That's how it has to be, she thought to herself. The Imperium wants me to be focused, so I'll be focused. I'll save them all, and show them just how powerful I really am. I'll save them. This time, I will. She set the food down, her hunger forgotten as she returned to her bed. She sat up straight, folding her hands in her lap once more as she peered at the wall, waiting for something. What, she could not say, and she doubted she would ever get a true answer. All she could see was Solemnus. After all, Mershan was dead. The little one knows, and yet you claim knowledge. You cannot see, not yet. Perhaps it has to be forced out. You already know the answer. The answer to the one question that will save your life, and theirs. But then, you do not want to answer that question, do you? What do you think they have lost? What will you lose? What are you willing to sacrifice for the sake of your friends? Chapter 3.02, Repairs. Veronica took a step back, allowing the repair servitors to pass by. The cyborgs gave no notion of recognition, plodding away down the hall with large piles of scrap metal and cut wiring clasped in their arms. Lord Matthias had explained they would be fed back into the Sanguinium Martyr's forges, Magos Errol and his fellow tech priests fabricating replacements from what had once been lost. All Veronica could remember was how the Magos and the captain had protested about letting outsiders touch his ship, but that was more Mechanicus weirdness than she needed. Where did Lord Matthias want us after this? Veronica turned at Rebecca's voice, watching as her sister and Ruth stepped past with a large box of scrap metal. I don't think I can spend another day hauling around this much metal. This was the last load for this section, Veronica said, moving to help her sisters. I believe Sister Bianca needed us back in the infirmary when we finished with this. You sure? Judith called from the rear, trying and failing to peek around the massive pile of scrap she carried. I know we're not much for appearances, but we're covered in Empress knows what and walking into an area with a lot of open wounds. Bianca and I have done most of the healing, Judith, Rebecca said, straining as she tried to squeeze through the nearest door to follow after the servitors. I think she mostly wants us to practice on our counseling. For Tara, then? Judith asked. The four fell silent, Veronica chewing her lip as she looked onward through the dark. It had been almost a week since they had exited the warp, since the Battle of Solemnus, and none of them had actually seen Tara come out of her room. The only indication she was still alive were the trays of partially eaten food she would leave outside her room every morning, and if Matthias was correct, a few missing books taken from his library. I do not wish to rush things, Veronica started. But perhaps we should try to get her out of her room, get her to open up more. I offered to study with her 2 days ago, Rebecca said, frowning. She said no, I have to do this alone. She has never turned down an offer to have a study buddy. Study buddy? Ruth asked, her brow furrowing. It is a companion who helps her go through some of her reading, Veronica said, giving Ruth a smile. Rebecca and I have done it several times during our transits through the warp. It is quite fun once you get the hang of Terra's moods. But why the name? Have you ever known Terra to be one for formalities? Rebecca asked. Ruth said nothing, finally giving a shrug of agreement as Veronica turned her focus back to the hallway ahead. The line of servitors had almost fallen out of sight, and the sisters had to pick up the pace to catch up to the cyborgs. Empress, thank you for Naomi's tutelage, Veronica thought. Running all those laps without armor has made this much easier than it would have been otherwise. The trek to the forge was a long one, made longer from a lance blast that had opened most of the direct corridors to the void. Down twisting service ramps and up small ladders the sisters wandered, never taking their eyes off the servitors in their slow march. The servitors would have no say, their augmented brains merely relaying all their tech priests felt necessary, but Veronica found her ire rising with each new turn they took through the ship. Why must we always suffer at the hands of the Mechanicum? Finally they came to the heart of the Sanguinium martyrs, the servitors forming a single line to drop their scrap before the billowing forges. Magos Errol was there with several other servitors, the tech priest quickly manipulating larger servo arms and arc welders to fabricate new sheets of armor and wiring. The servitors did not even stop, looping around the forge to grab the cooled metal and start off through the ship, a seemingly unending human conveyor belt that would have fascinated any other observer. Veronica only felt a chill run down her spine. Ah, sisters, Magos Errol said, skittering over to them as they deposited their own load on the pile. I admit that I had my trepidations before, but you have proven yourself more than adequate in acquiring more supplies. We are quite good at following instructions, Veronica said, stepping back as she did her best to be diplomatic. Sister Bianca requires our presence, though. Is there anything more that you require of us? No, that will be all, the Magos replied, pulling a few strands of wire from the pile with some of his servo arms. Though perhaps you may escort Lady Terra from the forge. She keeps drifting into my workspace and I cannot have uninitiated personnel impeding my work. Terra is here? Rebecca asked, eyes widening. Where is she? Oh. Veronica traced her sister's gaze. Terra was standing several meters to the left, her back to the forge as she looked at the unbound flame. The sisters had set up an impromptu shrine made of Mershan's relics before the coffin, the gauntlet and spear set neatly atop the folded drakescale cloak, and it was the shrine that captivated Terra's interest more than anything else. She made no sound, her hands tucked behind her back as she peered at the relics, and with the darkness of the forge she would have been invisible were it not for the Magos pointing her out. Should we leave? Ruth whispered. If we try approaching her now she might just shut us out. We can't just leave her alone all the time, Rebecca countered. Then she'll never open up. Think about what happened with you and Sister Naomi. That was an accident and we didn't grow closer until after our transport blew up under our feet. If Terra is mourning then it would be improper for us to interrupt. We can always join her, Veronica offered. I am sure she could use the company. Judith appeared to be of the same mind, stepping past the others as she marched over to Terra. Of course Judith would be the first to reach out, Veronica thought, hesitating for a moment more before moving to join her sister. They were just shy of Terra when the woman turned to face them, blinking in surprise as they drew closer. Oh, hello girls, she said, her voice oddly controlled. I didn't expect to see you down here. We were just assisting Magos Errol with repairs, Judith chirped, giving Terra a smile. How are you? We haven't seen you in a week. Oh, I've been busy, Terra said, pushing an errant lock of hair out of her eyes before continuing. I just needed a break, that's all. I should get back. Perhaps we could come with you? Veronica offered, taking a step towards Terra. Her own smile slipped as she saw the other girl shy away from her, as if she were some street thug threatening her with a knife. Pardon me for saying this, but you seem stressed. Perhaps some tea and a small chat would help you? No, but, thank you, Terra said, backing away from the others. I'm fine, really. I'll see you in the training room later? I had some ideas about my shields I wanted to try. Terra, please, Judith stepped forward now. We are only trying to. The sister never finished before Terra winked out in a flash of violet light, the sisters standing in silence before Judith's shoulders sagged. I ruined it. Do not be so hard on yourself, Judith, Rebecca said, coming up and resting a hand on Judith's shoulder. We took a chance, and we failed. We are sister of the Order of our Martyred Lady, and we have never let such a setback stall us for long. I know. Judith turned to look at the others. But she's going about this all wrong. Shutting herself off, deflecting. The group fell silent, looking from one another as if they would magically have an answer. When none was forthcoming, Veronica spoke. Let's just be thankful that she has come out of her room, she said. Let us all be the models of perfect sisters, and she will open up to us. Lord Velas, we are ready to test the distress beacon again. Good, Matthias said, turning to stand over the main comms line. Empress, please let this work. Open comms and activate the distress beacon. There was a pause, a small burst of static followed by silence. Matthias drummed his fingers against the panel, waiting for a signal from the tech priest. Magos Errol? Comms are showing open, Lord Velas, Errol replied. Though I suppose from your silence, not so on your end? No, Matthias said, groaning as he palmed his face. Damn it, what is it that we're missing? I will run another diagnostic scan on the system. Perhaps there is a subroutine that is blocking the machine spirit from properly performing its duties. Whatever it takes, Matthias said. Alert me when the diagnostic is finished. Yes, Lord Velas. The Vox clicked out, leaving Matthias alone once more. He sighed, stepping away from the console lest he start beating it out of frustration. Repairing the long-range comms was always going to be difficult, but 3 days of testing and still nothing. Empress, grant me patience to make it through another day, he mumbled. Spending some time in the chapel probably wouldn't hurt either, a small voice said at the back of his mind, but Matthias shook his head. The ship was his chapel now, duty his sacrifice. His actions would please the Empress, one way or another. You wanted to see me, Matthias? Matthias held his breath, turning to face Twilight as she stood in the doorway. She appeared drowsy, her eyes not as sharp as usual, but at least she was up and about. Though if my reports are anything to go by. Twilight, Matthias said, taking a moment to compose himself. Has the Empress tried contacting you? Twilight's shoulders sagged for a moment, but she was quick to compose herself again. Too quick. No, but I've been trying to focus on a few other things first, Twilight said. But once I've gotten that sorted out I'll contact the Empress and get her out here. She mumbled something else, looking away from Matthias as if he were a teacher scolding her. There was a pause before Matthias spoke. Twilight, are you okay? He asked. I've heard from the sisters that you've been acting odd lately. Odd? I'm not acting odd. You'd have an easier time convincing me you're really an orc. Matthias took a step towards Twilight. You've shunned contact even more than usual, you've been described as snippy with some of the crew members, and you've barely spoken with Naomi and the others since we left Solemnus. I understand that you are mourning. I am fine, Twilight snapped, glaring at Matthias as she continued. Everyone keeps asking me that, and yet no one seems to accept my assurance that I am fine. I'm doing great, actually. Twilight. Don't Twilight me. You're not the Empress. Twilight crossed her arms before continuing. I've been trying to do things your way, the Imperial way. I've mourned, and now I'm moving on. Why can't you all just accept that? Because you obviously haven't moved on. Matthias reached out towards Twilight, but she quickly smacked his hand away. Don't touch me, she snapped, drawing away from Matthias. I don't need help. I have a lot more to offer than just another weakling you have to trip over. You'll see, and then maybe you all will treat me with some respect. And with that she stormed off, Matthias staring blankly into space as she disappeared from sight. Instinct told him to go after her, perhaps apologize and make things right. But for what? At this rate she'll teleport me into a sun. He sighed and turned back, slowly approaching the comm station as static broke through the silence again. Errol? I have isolated the broken subroutine and will begin repairs. We will be ready for another test within the hour. A pause before the Magos spoke again. Lord Velas, are you well? Honestly, I don't know, Matthias sighed. Just prep the test. We need to get out of here, and fast. Rebecca was the last of the sisters to join the table, setting her tray down before smoothing out a wrinkle in her robes. She looked to Naomi, the sister superior, returning her gaze quickly. Would you like me to say the blessing? She asked. Of course, Rebecca. Naomi replied, giving a short nod. Rebecca returned the nod before turning to her food, making the sign of the Aquila before speaking. Glorious Empress, bless this food you have provided for us in these trying times, she said. Grant us strength and clear vision to see us through another day, and grant us rest tonight that we may continue to impart your vision upon the galaxy. A pause, Rebecca casting a glance to the others before adding. Blessed Empress, watch over your servant Terra, who suffers from her grief. Let us never forget all we have lost, and let us show your strength and kindness to all who are suffering, now as before. There is only the Empress. And she is our shield and protector. The others chanted, pausing before moving to eat. I wonder why she has not tried to find us yet, Ruth mused, taking a bite from a roll. I understand it is part of her plan, but it has been some time. I am sure she will be searching for us if we are lost for too long, Veronica offered. Or perhaps Tara might be able to contact her soon. There was a pause before Veronica looked to Rebecca. Perhaps you might be able to contact her. Me? Rebecca squeaked, shying away before continuing. I am no psyker. But you're a saint now, Judith said through a mouthful of food. That's got to count for something. I don't think that's how the element works. Rebecca looked down at her arm, as if expecting the element of kindness to materialize there on a moment's notice. I had been hoping to ask Tara about it, perhaps learn if there was anything more I could be doing, but, well, with all that has happened I did not want to impose. When she has healed a little more, then perhaps, Naomi said. For now, focus on our duties, and Tara will come to us. Rebecca and the others nodded, returning to their meals as they mulled over the discussion. They did not have long before a new presence entered the hall. Hello, sisters, Rebecca looked up as the Valhallans approached, Nikolai taking the lead. Would we be interrupting? No, make yourselves comfortable, Naomi said, gesturing to an empty section of the table. As the two troopers settled in, Naomi spoke again. Any more news from Lord Matthias? No, Alexis said, eating a spoonful of protein paste before continuing. He has been working with Magosarol to get our distress beacon working again. Haven't seen him leave the bridge in days, really. There was a pause, the Valhallan looking to his meal before chuckling. Can't say living on a space hulk is all it's shaped up to be. Feels like basic but with fewer commissars. I don't know about commissars, but the Sisters Superior of the Gracia Convent could be quite the taskmasters, Judith said, sliding down the bench until she was in front of the two Valhallans. At least we're alone out here rather than being attacked by Xenos or heretics. That wouldn't do any good for our repair attempts. Yes, Nikolai mumbled, keeping his attention down at his food. Ah, but we've been in worse before, Alexis said, pushing aside his rations. You know what Nikolai and I were doing before we were called to save Lord Matthias? Garrison duty. By the throne, that's a boring assignment. I wouldn't know. We've always seemed to be on the move, Judith's face grew somber. With a few exceptions. But surely it couldn't have been that horrible. You'd think that after a few years of jumping right into the teeth of orcs and tyrannids guarding a rising fortress world would be a break, but not so. Alexis shook his head. Some of the other troopers and I took to having grenade-throwing competitions to pass the time. Not this story. Nikolai muttered, shifting away as if it would somehow stop his brother from talking. From how excited the trooper was, and how interested Judith seemed, Rebecca guessed it didn't work. Anyway, we couldn't use real grenades because that'd just be a waste of ammunition, so we had to use some dummies they'd been training the new conscripts on. It was me, my brother, and this pinhead named Yuri that had been brought into our squad from one of the heavy weapons teams. We got some grenades and found a nice muddy field, figuring we'd be able to determine distance based on where the mud flew up when the grenades hit. Wouldn't a standard training field be more reasonable? Judith asked. I think we were a bit drunk at the time. So I step up first, throw the grenade and get it maybe 3 meters. Not my best throw, but what can you do? Nikolai steps up and manages to throw his grenade 5 meters. And then Yuri steps up and throws the grenade, but for the life of me I couldn't see where it landed. There was a pause, Judith waiting for Alexis to finish the story. She blinked, clenching her hands as the seconds ticked by. Even Rebecca could feel her brow furrowing in confusion and frustration as she waited. Anyway, we got the orders to go to Braxis soon after. Wait, what about the grenade? Judith cried. What about what grenade? Sisters and Valhallans turned to see Tara sitting down at the table, 2 rolls set on her tray. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Just getting some food before I go back to studying. Hello, Tara, Judith said, turning to face the other woman. I wanted to apologize for startling you the other day, at the shrine. You were having a moment of privacy, and we stumbled into it. I hope you can forgive us of our blundering. Rebecca nodded in agreement, looking to Tara for any sign of an effect. Tara said nothing, though Rebecca did notice that she ripped apart the first roll rather violently. This isn't helping. Thank you for your concern, Tara said, eating a piece of the roll. I'll keep that in mind. Hey, that reminds me of another story, Alexis started, drawing Judith's attention back to him. Lord Matthias told me about this one inquisitor that acquired a Joka arrow during one of his travels. A what? Rebecca asked. It's some kind of ape Xenos. Not sapient, but they make weird technology that some inquisitors like to study. Anyway, The Inquisitor needed to get to a new system, but the only ship he could find was commanded by a Magos with a reputation for despising pets. Not wanting to risk his Joka arrow to the Mechanicus, the Inquisitor stuffed it up his coat and pretended to be some morbidly obese nobleman or something. Several days into the charade, the Inquisitor is introduced to the Magos, whom he sees has an ornate Xenotech axe he carried as a trophy. The Magos approaches him and asks how the trip has been treating him, but before the Inquisitor can speak, the Joka arrow in his coat sneezes. Confused, the Magos rips open the Inquisitor's coat and reveals the ape. "Lord Inquisitor," he says, seizing the Joka arrow from the Inquisitor. "You know our law forbids pets aboard this vessel." "Does it?" the Inquisitor asks. "Well, you should also know that Xenotech is forbidden by Imperial law." And the Inquisitor stole the axe from the Magos. Furious, the Magos stormed over to a nearby airlock and pitched the Joka arrow inside, spacing it without another word. Judith and Rebecca let out small gasps at this. Xenos or not, the ape had done nothing to warrant spacing, and it must have been properly sanctioned if an Inquisitor was handling it. Right? Terra barely reacted. The Inquisitor was equally furious, Alexis continued. So he pushed the Magos aside and threw the axe into the airlock, spacing it without another word. Since he couldn't prosecute the Magos and the Magos couldn't kill him without drawing suspicion, both stormed off to their quarters and would not speak to each other again. A few more days pass, and as he's inspecting the vessel for hull leaks, the Magos hears a tapping sound near one of the ship's viewports. He looks out and there's the Joka arrow, staring in with a stupid look on its face. Guess what it had in its paws? Judith frowned. The axe? No, Yuri's grenade. Alexis finished, grinning like a madman. Rebecca blinked, turning the statement over in her mind several times. She worked her jaw, trying and failing to come up with an adequate response to what the Valhallan said. Judith burst out laughing. "Oh. That's funny," she cried, clutching at her sides as she laughed. I wish I had some stories like that for my training," she continued laughing, Rebecca finding a small smirk of her own growing on her lips. With all they had been through, perhaps a short laugh would be most welcome. Or it would have, if Terra's glare did not intensify. I have to remember that," Judith said, finally calming down as she looked to Alexis. "It might get me in trouble when we return to Palisades, but then I'm no stranger to that. Did I ever tell you about the time Rachel and I accidentally stole some communion wafers? How can you just sit around and talk about things like that?" All eyes went to Terra, the woman having redirected her glare from her food to the group. "We're stuck out here with no chance of rescue, and you just use the time to make jokes?" "Beats playing Vostroyan roulette," Alexis mumbled, earning a jab in the ribs from Nikolai. Terra pushed her tray away and stood. "We've been stranded out here for who knows how long, and yet I seem to be the only one that cares about more than this." "Terra, don't mistake our joking for ignorance," Judith said, rising to meet Terra before continuing. "We all know what is at stake, and we all are working to make it better. I mean no disrespect, but it seems that the only one who isn't is you." "Really?" Terra snapped, crossing her arms in front of her chest. "You think I'm trying to keep us out here or something? I have been studying night and day to find a solution to get us off this hulk, to find a way to save everyone as I should, and not one of you have lifted a finger to help me." "Terra, we have tried," Rebecca said, standing to hopefully de-escalate the situation. "Please, sit and finish your meal. We can talk more on this, and perhaps you'll feel better." "I'm fine. I'm completely fine." Terra brought her arms downward, a small pulse of her power flaring out her hair. "Why can't you all see that I am fine? I'm moving on, I am being productive, and I will get us out of here." "You haven't moved on," Judith said, taking a step towards Terra. "You're hurt, and you're trying to ignore it so you don't feel vulnerable again. I know it seems easy to just push everything away, but it always comes back. It doesn't seem to come back for you. Or do you all actually feel anything anymore?" Rebecca gasped, eyes darting to Judith. The other sister blinked in shock, her hands curling into fists. "You take that back," she whispered, a small tremor running through her body. "That's what I've come to realize about all of you," Terra said, pointing towards the group before continuing. "You're numb, all of you. On Caesarea, Rin's world, Solemnus, it doesn't matter who dies or how many die, just that your precious mission isn't totally ruined in the end. When was the last time you ever felt anything? When was the last time you actually felt real loss?" Rebecca opened her mouth to speak, reaching a hand towards Judith to calm the sister, but to no avail. One strike, and Terra was on her back, her hand clutching her lip as blood pooled around her fingers. Judith growled, pinning the other girl to the floor with her foot before speaking. "That's why you've hidden yourself away from us? She roared, pressing her foot harder into Tara's gut as she tried to squirm away. You've ignored us and rejected our offers of help because you think we don't know what you feel? That we're all just automatons sent to die gloriously in the Empress name? I thought you were our friend, but I suppose if that's what you think, you've learned nothing over the last 3 years we've known each other. By now Ruth had stepped up to pull Judith away, but the enraged sister easily shook the other off. Do you want to know the last time I felt loss? Do you? Every morning I wake up and look over at the next bunk, and every morning for 10 years it has been empty. Because Rachel isn't coming back, because she died on Moria and I couldn't do anything to stop it. By now Rebecca had moved, rounding the table and pushing back against Judith. The other sister stepped back, blinking as her anger drained away from her face. Judith, stop, Rebecca cried. You'll hurt her if you keep going. Just stop. Judith blinked again, staggering back as she came back to her senses. Finally, she let out a sniff and turned away, tears trailing after her as she ran from the mess hall and into the darkness. Judith. Tara called from behind Rebecca. Judith, I didn't mean to. Rebecca turned, watching as Tara tried and failed to pull herself up from the floor. Her lip had stopped bleeding, thankfully, but she too was trying and failing to hold back tears. Rebecca quickly crossed to her and knelt, placing a hand on Tara's shoulder. It's all right, Tara, she whispered. Just let it out. We know you didn't mean to say those things. I just wanted to move on, Tara sobbed. I just wanted TT to be like you all. To deny grief is to deny the Empress, for grief is to show we are still human, Ruth said from behind Rebecca. We all mourn for you, and for Mirchan, even if it seems as though we do not. Tara looked away, her eyes going soft as she reached to dry a tear from her eye. They sat in silence for another minute before she spoke again. I should go find her, she said. I shouldn't have said what I did. No, you shouldn't have, Rebecca said. But you were angry, and something needed to break. Judith understands that too, but she needs some time to rest and calm before you can speak to her. She looked Tara up and down. I suppose you need some rest too. You really don't look well. No. I suppose not. Tara shook her head. I'm sorry, Rebecca said nothing, pulling Tara into a hug as her tears flowed more freely. It took a moment for the other woman to return the hug, sobbing as Rebecca gently stroked her back. It was not peace. But perhaps it was a step towards something better. Chapter 3.03, Rachel. Judith let out a yawn, rolling over and pushing Frederick off her chest. She blinked a few times, allowing her eyes to adjust to the darkness of her sleeping quarters as she looked across to the next bunk. Still empty. As it always was. Well, maybe tomorrow will be better, Frederick, she said, giving the heavy flamer a small hug before swinging her legs over the side of the bed. Briefly her eyes fell to the scars on her left calf, but she pushed that out of mind as she stood up and grabbed a robe, draping it over her nightgown as she planned out the rest of her day. Matthias and the others need help with repairs. Then sparring. Then more assistance. She paused. Perhaps Tara will be more willing to open up about Mirchan. Their argument still lingered in the sister's mind, but Tara was going through a lot, perhaps she needed a moment to break and allow the anger to die down. But she didn't have to go that far. Judith shook her head, tying the front of her robe as she turned back towards her bed. The last thing she grabbed were a small strand of prayer beads, worn from use but far more valuable than any other possession of hers. Save perhaps Frederick. Ruth would be the only one up, ever diligently praying over their armor and weapons, so Judith would have some time alone to pray and think over the coming day. She smiled, humming a hymn as she trotted down the hall towards their common room. Perhaps if all went well, she and Frederick could spend some time on maintenance. Judith stopped mid-stride as she entered the room. Tara was there, sitting just off to the side of the sister's shrine. The girl looked awful, with great bags under her eyes and her hair in a tangled mess, though her gaze still seemed as sharp as ever as she spotted Judith. Oh, Tara. Judith squeaked, stepping back as she continued. I had no idea you were up so early, and here. I didn't sleep, Tara said, her voice flat. I haven't been able to sleep for days now. Judith remained silent, watching as Tara blinked before rising up to her feet. If it's too much of a bother, I'll come back later. No, Judith said, stepping forward and resting a hand on Tara's shoulder. Stay. You came here for a reason, so there's no need to leave before you have had your say. Tara hesitated, but soon gave a short nod as Judith guided her to Ruth's prayer mat, the sister taking her own as she waited for Tara to speak. And wait she did. Several times Tara made to speak, only to draw back and return her eyes to the shrine. Judith knew it best to let her speak when she was ready, but a little ice breaking would not hurt. Would you like something to drink? She offered. No recaf, or tea. Rebecca almost broke my hand the second time I tried to use her tea set. She paused before giggling. You do not want to know about the first time. Tara ventured a quick smile, but that vanished almost as soon as it had come. Well, at least she's not mad. Judith looked to the shrine, her eyes tracing the fabric of the cloth in an effort to find the focus of Tara's gaze. That task a failure, she shifted in her seat, her hands brushing against the prayer beads on her wrist for encouragement. Tara finally said, Judith's head snapping in her direction. I'm sorry about what I said, about none of you feeling pain and loss. I know, Judith replied. And believe me, I was much the same when I was younger. If it is any help, I forgive you. Thanks, Tara said. I have a friend a lot like you. Back home. She hesitated. The thought of me losing her friendship, your friendship, over something I said in a moment's anger. I can't even think about how awful that would be. If your friends are like you, then I am sure they would be quick to understand. Judith offered. Tara fell silent for another minute, Judith reaching over to rest a hand on the other woman's knee. I'm no stranger to death, Tara said, looking towards Judith. My grandmother passed when I was little, before the Empress took me under her tutelage. My parents tried to break it gently, said she'd gone to be somewhere nice and safe. But I figured it out a lot quicker than they thought I would. It hurt then, but I was younger and maybe it passed quicker than it should. She turned away, flicking a stray tear from her eye. But now, Mirshan's gone. I could have saved him, stopped that thing from killing him, but I didn't. He saved your life, Tara, Judith said. If he had not intervened when he did, the demon would have overpowered and killed you. You don't know that, Tara cried, turning back towards Judith as her tears fell more freely. I am the Empress' personal student. I know pretty much everything she knows. I could have done more. Tara, that demon had all but knocked you out already. Another strike and Lord Mirshan would be here mourning your loss instead of you mourning his. Tara fell silent, turning away as Judith continued. I know it hurts, and it pains me to say this, but there really wasn't anything more you could have done. The two said nothing, Judith watching Tara as she mulled over what the sister had said. Judith waited a little longer before speaking again. I know how much you admired him, she said. He seemed like the only one that really believed in what I spoke of, Tara replied. Matthias and Korak seemed to humor me at times. You all seemed to think I was crazy. I didn't think you were crazy, Judith chirped. Maybe a little naive, but not crazy. Especially not after you helped make Rebecca a saint. My point is, Tara continued. Mirshan agreed with me. He always spoke of compassion, understanding, and he never tried to counter me with things like that's just how this galaxy is. Under normal circumstances Judith would have laughed at Tara's impersonation of Lord Matthias, but she chose to keep quiet for now. Mirshan wasn't like that. And now he's dead. If his words still ring true in your heart, then he is never truly dead and gone, Judith replied, sitting up straighter before continuing. When I was in training, I was taught that the fallen are taken to the Emperor's side in preparation for the final war against the darkness. That is all well and good, but at times Saint Gracia will come and select a few to return in spirit to the Imperium, for their work was not quite finished when they died. These heroes stay with us in their words, their actions, guiding us subtly from the void so we can complete our tasks. Some are powerful enough to return and become living saints, though that hasn't happened with our convent for some time. Tara looked away, Judith reaching out to rest a hand on her shoulder before continuing. Mirshan may be dead in body, but his spirit and his soul lives on within you. You still hold the message of kindness and gentleness, even when others might have forgotten, and your faith in such matters will keep that message alive within you even when all others fall away. She paused for a moment, looking away and chewing her lip. I sounded a lot like Ruth there. She was always better at this sort of thing than me. You seem to be doing fine, Tara offered before pulling away. But it's easy to say you won't forget, that the soul of someone sticks with you through everything. But what if it doesn't? Judith frowned, clenching her hands as she thought of something to say. Finally, she saw her eyes drifting past Tara, towards the hallway leading to her room. Wait here. I have something I want to show you. Twilight watched Judith disappear down the hall, her gaze lingering as if she expected the sister to return just as fast. When it became apparent that was not going to be the case, she turned her vision back to the shrine, trying her best to keep her thoughts focused on what Judith wanted to show her rather than. Twilight shook her head. No. And no, Judith's wrong. I could have done more. It would have been easy. A shield spell, perhaps, deflecting that final bolt. But then, the creature had broken her last shield so easily, who's to say he couldn't have shattered a new one? Teleport, moving Meerschain out of the way and back to her and the others. And what would her follow-up be, with the demon still alive? Would she have been able to protect the sisters too? Would that have just led to more death? Would she have saved anyone then? Meerschain. She thought. If Judith's right, and you are still here guiding me, why couldn't I have done more? She sniffed, drying a few errant tears as she continued to wait. Finally she heard Judith return, the sister taking her seat once more as Twilight saw something clutched in her hand. Now, what I'm going to show you is very special to me, Judith said. Only Sister Naomi knows I have this, so promise me you won't tell the other girls? I promise. Twilight was half tempted to make it a full pinky promise, but the possibility of confusing Judith was not something she wanted to deal with right now. Judith hesitated, looking down at the object before taking a short breath and passing it to Twilight. Twilight gingerly accepted the gift, turning it over in her hands to get a better look at it. It was a picture, well preserved in a metal frame. It showed a great statue of a woman, kneeling with her hands spread out as if offering gifts to those below. Sitting beneath the statue were two girls, dressed in similar robes to what Judith was now wearing, small dishes of ice cream in their hands. It was so peaceful, unlike any image Twilight had seen since arriving in the Imperium. The first girl was obviously Judith, perhaps a little plumper and less battle-worn, but Judith nonetheless. She wore a massive smile, and probably more of her treat than she had eaten, but that did little to dampen her spirits as she posed for the picture. The other girl was more demure, regal, only the hint of a smile gracing her lips as she regarded Judith with a sideways glance. Is that Rachel? Twilight asked after a minute of studying the picture. Judith nodded before continuing. This was taken on our last day of training, when the Feast of St. Gracia coincided with our Shrine World's annual spring festival. Our convent is more puritanical than most, and we normally wouldn't participate beyond security and officiating, but Canoness Diana gave us one day to go out and enjoy some time away from our duties. She paused. From what Sister Naomi told me, she almost had to fight a duel to secure that time. Knowing some of our elders, I wouldn't be surprised. Anyway, we had just been put into our battle squads, and I was lucky that Rachel was put in mine. We'd always done everything together, so that day we went out and enjoyed the festivities. Judith beamed. There were songs, games, dances. They were even handing out those little cups filled with some kind of frozen cream. Have you ever had anything like that? Almost whenever I wanted, Twilight thought, but she quickly pushed the thought out of her mind. A long time ago, I think. I was a little surprised since we didn't get many sweets in the convent, but this was. It was like nothing I had ever had before. Twilight said nothing, watching Judith gush over her memories. And Rachel? She was always a stoic, but I always knew when she was happy. She just had that kind of air about her. A kind of peace, a shift of the eyes, that sort of thing. Many of my sisters took it for granted, but I knew when she was happy. And that was probably the best day she and I had ever had. Judith paused, her expression dropping. The last best day, I suppose, for the next day we were boarding our transports and heading to Moria. I heard you and the others mention Moria before, Twilight said. But you never really do more than mention. It's one of the darkest points of the Gracia convent service. We have a certain reverence for it, a sort that Sister Naomi was unsure about introducing you to for a number of reasons. Oh, Twilight said, her spirits dropping. But if you're going to know about Rachel, I have to talk about Moria, Judith continued, straightening up so Twilight could see her fully. It was then she noticed the sister was fighting tears of her own, chewing her lip to force herself to continue. Moria is a tech world not too far from our shrine world of Palisades. The tech priests of Styges 8 used it as a testing ground for their research, but that's about all I was told en route. Some had rebelled against Terra and the Mechanicus, starting a civil war we should not have had much of a part in save that we were nearby and offered to help. By that point the armies of Styges and the Imperial Guard had arrived in force, and we had assumed we would arrive for some easy mopping up and heretic executions, a good teeth cutting for all us new initiates. They didn't anticipate us arriving a month ahead of schedule. Judith turned away, her voice quivering. The Mechanicus don't understand. Normal humans at times. To them, we were just more bodies, more guns to bring against the rebels. Canoness Diana protested, but we still found ourselves tossed right into the thick of things, with orders to take down the last line of defenses the tech heretics had for their stronghold. Tempestuous stormtroopers or space marines would have been better suited for the mission, but they had us instead. And we suffered for it. She stopped, her voice catching once more. I'm sorry, Tara. I'm not normally this choked up about these things. No, it's okay. Twilight reached out, resting a hand on Judith's shoulder. You don't have to go on if you don't want to. I have to, Judith said, shaking her head. If you're going to get better, you need to know about Rachel. But it's clearly breaking you up, Twilight continued. I know you're trying to help, but I don't want to cause anyone else any more pain. No. It's better if I say this. Judith paused, flicking away a tear. Rachel would have wanted me to do this. Twilight's jaw tightened, her mind trying and failing to come up with some rebuttal that would give Judith an out, but nothing materialized. It was wrong to just let a friend be so broken up like this. But then, I've been suffering on my own these last few weeks, and where has that gotten me? Okay, she said, withdrawing her hand from Judith's shoulder. Go on. Judith remained silent for another minute, her hands tightening around a wrinkle in her robe. Finally, she spoke. I'm sure I've mentioned this, but there were 30 girls in my training barracks, Judith said softly. 30 girls, just like me. Only Ruth and I survived Moria. And Rachel. Rachel was the first of them to die. Judith would have ducked as another volley of artillery shells whistled overhead, but she and Rachel were already moving too fast to be worried about such matters. They did duck when the shells impacted, her ears ringing as the high explosive shells blew hundreds of chunks of earth into the air. Once the rain of earth ended, Judith rose and looked back to Rachel, the other sister rubbing some traitor's blood off her face before looking to her. Are you okay? Rachel asked, her voice impossibly calm. Terrified, but never better. Judith chirped, hefting her heavy flamer up as she turned back to the front. Come on, the others are waiting, Rachel said nothing, quickening her pace as the two sprinted down the line. The Krieg had dug hundreds of fortifications around the city, the myriad of trenches and foxholes making the going difficult for the sisters. Judith stumbled before diving into the next trench, Rachel following soon after and almost bumping into her in the process. Judith. Rachel. The two junior sisters snapped to attention as Sister Superior Madeline stepped past the other retributors in their squad. Why did you fall behind? We were separated by traitors, my lady, Judith explained, holding her heavy flamer close. I apologize for the delay. As you should. We are behind schedule, and Lady Diana needs this sector cleared. Madeline then looked to Rachel, noticing the blood on her face. And what happened to you? Traitor. Judith punched its head off. Rachel replied. It was quite impressive. There was a moment as Madeline gave Rachel an odd look, but finally nodded and ushered them back towards the squad. Judith jogged towards the front, pushing through the others to find her spot before peeking over the edge of the trench. Ahead of them was a vast, dead field. Craters and ruined vehicles of war dotted the landscape, some still pouring smoke and fire from recent hits. Dozens of broken and mangled bodies littered the space between craters and broken tangle wire, mostly Death Corps soldiers, but Judith could see a number of red and black-clad Skitarii shattered from the tides of war. And a few of her sisters laying among them. The air was alive with gunfire, bright tracers and last bolts flying back and forth between the two lines. Judith could see some survivors from previous charges huddled behind wrecks and digging into craters, doing their best to keep their heads down lest the traitors turn their guns on them. Well, it might make things a little easier for us. Judith thought, shaking her head as she focused back on reality. Squad primed, Sister Superior. One sister in the group called. On my signal, start moving, Madeline replied. We'll burn out that trench so the rest of our sisters may advance. Prepare yourselves. Judith could not see her commander, but nodded all the same as she flicked her heavy flamer's pilot light back on. I should really give you a name. Emperor, if it is my destiny to survive this battle, grant me a name for this your blessed flamer. Go, now. Sister Madeline bellowed, climbing up over the edge of the trench. Purge these heretics with bolter and fire. For the Emperor. For the Emperor. Judith and the others cried, rushing up and over the top. She was aware of other groups like them charging out into the open, but all she could focus on right now was the trench ahead of them. And the heavy gun emplacement swinging towards them. They were hit almost immediately, Judith ducking aside as a burst of heavy stubber fire sliced through sisters Caroline and Vanessa behind her. The distances was much too far for her heavy flamer to reach, but the sisters behind her answered with bolters to try and keep some of the heavy gunfire off of them. Rachel was among them. Emperor, please protect my sister. There was a whistle in the air, Judith only getting a chance to look up as something dropped in among them. She threw herself down just as the mortar exploded, shrapnel pinging off her back followed by more dirt and stone. Smoke wafted over her body, causing her to gag as she turned to see if any of her sisters still stood. "Sister Madeline?" she cried, coughing as she turned about. "Sister Madeline? Sister Riza? Rachel?" The smoke began to clear, Judith spotting several of her sisters pulling themselves up to continue the charge. 4 would not rise again. Still, Judith found herself crying in relief as Rachel broke through the smoke. "Rachel!" "Judith," Rachel said, her brow bloody from a piece of shrapnel. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine." Judith smiled. "The Emperor protects us today." "Keep moving, sisters!" Sister Madeline shouted, recovering her power maul from where it had been knocked from her hand. "The trench must be cleared. Judith, lead on." "Yes, ma'am." Judith hefted her heavy flamer around and continued to charge, keeping her breath controlled even as more bullets went whistling past her head. A wet thud told her that another one of her sisters had been hit, but all she could focus on now was the trench. The traitors within. Those who had killed her sisters. "Traitors," Judith cried, slowing only just as she raised her flamer. "Please send my regards to the Emperor's throne." The soldiers in question had no time to bring their heavy stubber around before Judith pressed down on the activation rune, a wave of fire washing over the trench and the cultists within. Their screams barely rose above the roar of the flamer, Judith sweeping the weapon across the trench as Rachel and the others rushed to her side. Bolter shells and flame rained down on the traitors below, reaping a terrible slaughter as the last of the retributors burned through their foes. "Quickly now, before the traitors can regroup," Madeline called, leaping into the trench and crushing a traitor's skull with her mace. "Judith, move up the trench, focus on those guns." "Yes, ma'am." Before Judith could move, she heard a faint crack of gunfire. A sniper, out of sight for now but still a great danger. She opened her mouth to warn Sister Madeline before her left leg exploded with pain, the sniper's bullet stabbing through her armor and blasting her calf to shreds. "Ow!" Judith squeaked, toppling over as Rachel rushed to her side. Adrenaline dulled some of the pain, but trying to move her leg felt as though she were being stabbed again and again. Sister Madeline. "Sniper." "Of course the traitors have no honor." The Sister Superior growled. "We must keep moving before that coward takes another shot." "Judith. Can you move?" "No." Judith bit her lip to keep from crying. "Oh Tara, my leg hurts." "We cannot risk losing our momentum," Madeline said. "We will have to leave you here. We'll signal a Medicaid to pick you up." Madeline stopped, and Judith felt something slipping under her armor. She gave a small gasp of pain as her leg jostled her rescuer, though she bit back her gasps as she was shifted about. "I'm taking her back," Rachel said, a small grunt being the only sound of exertion she gave. "Sister Rachel. The traitors will close in on us if we are not standing together." Madeline barked. "She will be secure here. Let the Medicaid do their jobs. My sister needs my help. Saint Gracia would never allow her sister to fall unaided. Your orders are to secure the trench. My duty is to save my sister." Rachel turned, Judith watching the world spin as they reoriented towards friendly territory. "I'm sorry, ma'am." With that they started off, Rachel springing as fast as she could without jostling Judith further. Judith whimpered, clutching her heavy flamer tightly as bullets traced their retreat. "Rachel?" Judith asked, her voice weak. What was the name of Saint Caiaphas' aide? Wasn't it Frederick?" "It was Farik," Rachel replied, skirting a shell hole to dodge a burst of gunfire. "No, I think it was Frederick." Judith looked to her flamer. "This is my Frederick. He keeps me safe and kills heretics." "Frederick is a nice name. Just be sure to speak with a tech priest to make sure it is all right with them." Judith gave a small smile, even if Rachel could not see it. Her sister was always there for her. Judith blinked a few times as she heard screaming. Very familiar, very angry screaming. She tried to look up, but all she could see was a ruined Lehman Russ executioner that Rachel was making a beeline for. A brief burst of gunfire filled her hearing, bullets sparking off the destroyed tank as Rachel shifted Judith off her shoulders and set her down behind cover. It did not take long for the wounded sister to realize they were not alone. "Controlled bursts, Ruth," a helmeted Sister Superior called, pulling down a second sister as a stream of bullets flew overhead. "Keep firing like that and you will have spent all your ammunition for nothing." "But those bastards killed my sisters," Ruth cried. "I want them to suffer for what they have done. The Emperor's wrath flows through me. And will be spent uselessly if you shirk wisdom and direction." The Sister Superior countered, quickly ducking around the edge of the tank to let out a short burst of gunfire from her combi flamer. "The Emperor's wrath is a mighty thing, but only when tempered with wisdom and control. Yes, Sister Naomi, Ruth said, giving a short nod. There was a pause before Ruth turned and spotted Judith. Wait, Judith? What are you doing here? Hi Ruth, Judith said, managing a smile despite the pain in her leg. It was now she could see Ruth was injured too, a large cut running from her scalp to her right cheek. I hope your day's going better than mine. Ruth, you know these two girls? The sister superior, Naomi, asked. Why yes, Sister Naomi, Ruth said quickly. They were in my training barracks back on Palisades. The superior nodded, shifting forward to check Judith's injuries. She gingerly lifted Judith's leg, Judith giving a squeak as it throbbed with pain. Sniper, I'm guessing, the older sister said. Fortunately it doesn't look like it hit your bone. Some surgery will get you back on your feet in no time. Judith watched as the sister superior ripped a strip of cloth from her tabard, wincing as she wrapped it around Judith's shredded calf. That should stop the bleeding for now. Thank you, sister, Judith said, any further discussion drowned out by a mortar exploding nearby. Sister Naomi turned her attention to Rachel. Name and squad, sister? Rachel, assigned to Sister Madeline's Retributors, Squad 17 Epsilon. Rachel replied. Madeline's not one to let her girls run off like this, wounded or otherwise. Naomi drew back, Judith hearing the faint click of the Sister Superior's vox. 17 Epsilon, this is Sister Superior Naomi, come in 17 Epsilon. Madeline, it's Naomi. I've found two of your girls back here. A pause, punctuated by more gunfire. I'd hardly call rescuing a wounded comrade desertion, but I do understand the need. Another pause. Negative. My squad's been shattered and I'm pinned down. I can send the unwounded one back to you, but that's all. More gunfire and another mortar, Rachel shifting to shield Judith from the worst of the blast. Understood, she's on her way back now. Naomi's vox clicked off as she looked back to Rachel. Your squad's being pressed. The Sister Superior said. Return to them and help them break out. No. Rachel replied. I need to protect my sister. She'll be fine under my care, Naomi countered, rising up to look down on the two younger sisters. But we must not forget our duty to our other sisters and to the Emperor. We'll provide covering fire for you. But my sister needs my help, Rachel said, her voice rising ever so slightly. Judith shifted as best she could, so she could look up at Rachel. Rachel, you need to go, she said. The other sister looked down at her, eyebrows raised. But you're hurt, Rachel said. I need to make sure you're safe. I'm safe now, Judith replied, reaching out and resting a hand on Rachel's arm. Sister Naomi and Ruth will look after me, and I have Frederick. Our other sisters need your help now, and we can't let them down. Can we? Rachel hesitated. For perhaps the first time since Judith had met her she showed full worry, her stoic expression slipping away as she looked between Judith and Sister Naomi. Finally, she spoke. Take care of her, she said, taking up her bolter and preparing to duck out of cover. She's my friend. I have no intention of losing another sister under my care today, Sister Naomi said, reloading her weapon before looking to Ruth. On my signal, Ruth, unleash hell on those heretics. I am the voice of the Emperor, and he will find them all wanting, Ruth replied, bringing her bolter up in preparation. Judith pushed back with her good leg, just enough to stay behind the Lehman Russ and out of sight. She looked to Rachel, watching her sister brush her finger across the trigger of her bolter in anticipation. Go, now. Naomi and Ruth popped over the top of the wreck, their bolters roaring as they opened fire on their targets. Rachel gave a short nod, leaping from behind cover and taking a few shots of her own to clear the path. Then, Judith heard it. The faint crack of a sniper rifle, further away but still sharp among the general roar of battle. She winced, her leg throbbing once more, but behind cover she would be safe from such an attack. The wet smack of a bullet hitting flesh stilled her heart, and she could only watch in silence as the shot found its mark. Rachel staggered back, her bolter tumbling from her hands as she reached for her throat. Crimson blood spilled across her hands and chin, the sister trying and failing to stop her severed jugular from bleeding further. Rachel sank to her knees, gasping as she choked on her own blood, her eyes drifting to Judith before she toppled over and fell still, her hands falling limp as blood pooled in a macabre halo around her head. Judith choked, tears welling in her eyes as she watched her sister die. Our Rachel. I don't remember much after that, Judith said, hanging her head once more. Ruth told me a medic found us and we got back to friendly lines. I spent 3 days in surgery as they rebuilt my leg. For emphasis she rolled up the hem of her robe, Twilight seeing her left calf covered in white scar tissue. It still aches from time to time, especially on remembrance days, but I've managed. I'm sorry, Judith. Twilight started. I had no idea. You never asked, and we never told you. There's no way you could have known about Moria. Judith looked up to the shrine. Almost the entire force Canoness Diana brought from Palisades died that day, cut down by enemies we were not prepared to face. 500 were new initiates, just like me, Ruth, Veronica, and Rebecca. The others were experienced trainers and spiritualists, looking to give a few last pieces of advice to their former charges before we were sent out into the wider galaxy. When they fell, along with Canoness Diana, we barely had the resources to train a new wave of recruits. That's why they call us the Lost Convent, for so much of our blood was spilt, new and old, we are on the verge of going extinct. Silence reigned, Twilight looking to Judith in case the sister wished to continue. Sensing an opening, Twilight spoke. I'm really sorry for your loss, Judith, she said. I can't imagine what it's like to lose so many people you care about. It kind of makes my own problems seem smaller. No, Judith snapped, grabbing Twilight and turning her so they were face to face. Don't ever say anything like that to me again. Whether it's 1 Astartes or 100 sisters, there is no scale of grief to be applied to loss. You losing Mershan is no different from me losing my squad, or my commander. Or Rachel. Twilight watched as Judith tried once more to bite back her tears, the sister releasing Twilight's shoulder to wipe her eyes. How do you get through all this? Twilight asked. You always seem so chipper and happy, so how do you get through all the pain and loss? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Judith shrugged. Sometimes I go to sleep and return to Moria. I think it's all a bad dream, and when I wake up, Rachel will be there to comfort me. I know she won't be, but maybe someday, I think, I'll be wrong. She paused, a smile returning to her lips. But more than that, I dream of the two of us, dancing through the harvest festival, treats in our hands and smiles on our faces. Well, my face, anyway. Because that's who Rachel was, not a sister who died horribly and pointlessly on some forgotten battlefield, but my friend whom I loved more than anything save the Empress herself. Twilight chewed her lip, looking to Judith for a moment before turning away. If it helps, think more about Mershan. Not Forgefather Mershan, or Lord Mershan, just Mershan. Twilight furrowed her brow, casting her thoughts back so she could find moments that best fit what Judith said. A minute passed, Twilight doing her best to grasp memories without breaking down and pulling away. He always wanted to help, she finally said. Not just me, but Matthias, you and your sisters. After everything we went through on Caesarea, I didn't think there were any truly kind people outside my little group. And yet there he was. I was always told the salamanders were among the kindest of the Emperor's angels, Judith added. He always spoke highly of you, in what little time I was ever in his presence. Usually during mealtimes. I never expected an Astartes to be fine with sitting with the likes of us. Yes. Twilight nodded. But he was more than that, wasn't he? Judith continued. You knew him the best of all of us, surely. He helped me on Rin's world, keeping me balanced when things started getting worse. Matthias and I had our issues, but Mershan never lost hope in me. Twilight paused as another thought came to mind. You know, he's probably the only person in years to actually shake my hand? Judith gave a little gasp of surprise. Really? Yes. Everyone else was all salutes and bows and occasional glares, and Mershan offered me a handshake. A pause before Twilight let out a short chuckle. The 8-foot-tall superhuman with glowing red eyes acted more human than most humans I've ever met. Judith joined in with a chuckle of her own. He laughed at my story about kissing Ruth. Definitely human to me. Twilight let out a snort, cupping her mouth in her hand to suppress her laughter. I shouldn't be laughing like this, she started, nibbling on her hand to try and bite back her giggles. Mershan would have laughed like this, Judith offered, her grin widening before she continued. Big and scary he might have been, but he was really he was like Frederick. Mershan was your Frederick. He was. Your flamer? Twilight asked, working her jaw for a moment. I don't. Both are highly affectionate, comforting, and they love starting fires. Twilight blinked, unsure of what to think of Judith's triumphant grin. It was a simplistic take, even childish, and yet happy, friendly heavy flamer. Twilight snorted again before laughing, rocking back as she tried to contain herself. Oh dear, she gasped. Why, you're right. I don't know why I didn't see it before, but you're right. I always am, no matter what Ruth says about me, Judith chirped as Twilight continued to laugh. She could feel tears forming in her eyes again, but this time she did not try to fight them. This felt good. Oh, Judith, she said, wiping away a few tears before continuing. I really needed that. Just a chance to feel good again. Think about better times. Cherish that, Tara, Judith said, reaching out and resting a hand on Twilight's cheek. Think of it, relish in it, for that is what Meerschaum was and will always be. To think of him only as a casualty of war is to dishonor his memory, just as if I were to think of Rachel as another martyr for the Golden Throne. It will be hard, I won't deny that, but the joy that you have witnessed in your brief time with him will far eclipse the pain that you feel now. Yes. Twilight nodded, feeling her smile growing stronger. Yes, I will. I will never forget Meerschaum, no matter how much it hurts or how long it takes. I might struggle, but I have you, Matthias, and the others. She let out a small chuckle. I will never forget, and I will always remember everything Judith, you're glowing. I am? Judith asked, looking down at her hands even as her voice shifted. Sure enough, her hands were enveloped in a light pink glow, energy running up and down her arms as she marveled at them. Twilight drew back, giving the sister some room as she tried to make more sense of what she was seeing. Finally, Judith looked up at Twilight, a massive grin on her face. Does this mean I get to be a saint too? That's way better than being a canoness. End of chapter 3.03, Rachel.